Hello, my name is Steve D'Agostino, and my co-host Anne Fernald and I welcome you to the Twice Over podcast, because to teach is to learn twice over. In this episode, Working for Change, Anne and I are joined by Diontay Santiago from Fordham University's class of 2021. He is the current president of the Black Student Alliance, Asili, and a student fellow in the Office of the Chief Diversity Officer. He shares his thoughts with us about his commitment to greater diversity, equity, and inclusion.
We have so much to talk about today, but I really just wanted to give our listeners a chance for you to introduce yourself to them. So can you just tell us about where you're from, what you're majoring in, and kind of why you decided to become active as a student leader in your time at Fordham?
My name is Diontay Santiago. I'm born and raised in the Bronx, New York. I'm a marketing major in the Gabelli School of Business, and I decided to become, one of the leaders of Asili because personally, for me, my time at Fordham University, especially my first 2 years as such, weren't necessarily a very enjoyable experience. I did not like being at the school, and it had affected my mental health to a degree. Setting foot on this campus was like a sombering experience every day, Well, at least it was back then. Now, cool. Now I like it a little bit more. But back then, it was somewhat of like a drag to have to come to school. It was affecting my grades, social life, I guess you could say. I don't know. I just wasn't really feeling it back then. Then I had found my own community within the school, Asili, and kind of being able to branch into Asili helped me to branch out to other fields of the school. And like now I kind of feel more comfortable and integrated into the Fordham community. It just helped me. And I just want to make sure that in the process of me being helped by the club, I can also return that and, bring it to other students who might not be necessarily integrated into the community easily, especially Black students who are on the campus. Like that's my main concern, knowing that I kind of went through that. So
what made you feel like you wanted to stick it out? What made you able to persist? And can you talk a little bit more about like what made it hard? What made it feel like this is, a somber experience, like stepping on campus? I don't feel like, oh, I'm entering this palace of knowledge, but oh, here I am again, and this is going to stink.
Could definitely say like my first semester at college, like I was kind of enamored with the access to all these different like facilities, amenities that the school offers, libraries. Just seeing like a whole entire like, college experience kind of was something that I don't really know about. Like, I don't have any family before me who's went to any college other than Bronx Community College. Being at like a big 4-year institution was kind of impressive and like interesting to me until I started realizing it doesn't necessarily mesh well with the kind of culture that I grew up in. The Bronx and Fordham University. I mean, although Fordham University is in the Bronx, it has a heavy juxtaposition to what the rest of the Bronx, for the most part, looks like and acts like and feels, I guess you could say. When I started to really feel like that disconnect a little bit more, like it definitely was somewhat jarring for me. It doesn't necessarily like stop at like the differences in the culture, but also like some of the derogatory ways that some of my peers would speak about like, the borough that I'm from and such. And I have like stories, examples, but I don't want to get too like deep and like far into them, just because like there's plenty of them. There's like a plethora of examples.
But no one wants to hear their home made fun of or talked about as a scary place or talked about as somehow like a place not to go. It's your home.
Yeah, at the end of the day, I will understand. Somebody said there are certain areas in the Bronx that are dangerous. I agree. I live in the Bronx. There are certain places that are dangerous. But then, when people are saying, like, oh, the Bronx is full of poor and dirty people, that's a whole entire different kind of disparaging.
Can you talk about your sense of Fordham as a student in high school in the Bronx? What made you want to come here? And what did you know about the university when you were making that decision?
It's funny. I was just talking to Dean Rogers yesterday. He asked me the same question. I didn't know about Fordham when I was in high school. The Bronx Community Board 6th District, which is like the same district that Fordham University is in, like the same district that I live in. And I had never really known like Fordham University until I got to like my senior year of high school. I just knew it was somewhere on Fordham Road. My high school guidance counselor, I didn't really know where I wanted to go. So he told me a bunch of good schools to apply to that he felt, I could get into with my grades, like my SAT score. So, I applied to Fordham, and when it came down to it, Fordham was like the most affordable choice for me, most reasonable choice in terms of proximity to where I live, the amount of financial aid and, scholarship that I had gotten. So I wasn't active in my choice of choosing Fordham. It kind of just so happened that I ended up here. I actually never stepped foot on the campus until the Accepted Students Day, like March or May 2017. The first time, my first real interaction with Fordham University. That's when they give out the free food. Everything is cute and nice.
What would you say to Deontay back in 2017 when he's walking onto campus, what would you tell him?
I would definitely tell him to spend more time in the library. I would say to find a community that you can engage with and relate to, just because being a fish out of the water is no fun. I mean, at the end of the day, I feel like everybody to a degree is a fish out of water once they get to colleges and universities. I don't think it's necessarily exclusive to Black students, but definitely when you go into like a PWI, predominantly white institution, it could definitely be a little bit more out of the water, I guess you could say. Go find friends, go find a community. I went to Asili meetings in my first semester, but I didn't necessarily interact with that many people in the club. I didn't really like talk to many of them. I didn't really know how to like make friends in that space, I guess you could say initially. Just because like the kind of like spaces that I come from, there's like it's homogenous, I guess you could say. Like we're all kind of like the same background, same races for the most part. When you start meeting people who are from like all around the world, difficult. So I definitely say like try harder to actually engage with Fordham, try to like make friends. I kind of just gave up my freshman year. I was like, nah, this is not for me, until it was for me.
When freshmen come to Asili meetings now, do you have a way of hooking them in, of encouraging them to get involved? Is there a strategy?
I would definitely say we try to do as many events as we can that are like freshman friendly, that are focused on like social interaction and creating bonds and like communities and stuff like that. Facilitating people into like friendships and like connections is way easier than just kind of letting people like walk around and, like figure it out on their own and stuff. We also try to like be friends with the freshmen as much as possible. I know that being friends with upperclassmen and seeing upperclassmen who are able to do the things I felt like I couldn't do, the fact that they were able to be there for 4 years and graduate and not be miserable, I was like, hey, like if they could do that, I definitely can. And kind of showing freshmen like, the 4 years aren't going to be so bad. You make your friends, you have your own people. So we kind of try to just make sure that they have like as much interaction with other students as much as possible. Unfortunately, due to like coronavirus, the pandemic has been a little bit more difficult to kind of facilitate that. But we've been doing our own things that we're definitely trying to move forward with, especially like this year, trying to adjust to the pandemic.
I keep coming back to the 2017 Deontay and your family. So proud to send you here, and it's your first day, and you're so excited, and you're walking on campus. And so I asked you what you would do differently. What would you say to the university, the faculty, the people who attempt to build the community here, the adults, when thinking about you, 18-year-old you walking on campus? What would you want us to know? What should Fordham have done differently so you wouldn't feel that sense of isolation and despair?
That's a good question. I feel like that's always one that I've always grappled with and like kind of have had the most difficulty in kind of answering, just because sometimes, how can I put it? I'm not going to say that like, it's not like there's nothing that like faculty or administration could do. But sometimes I feel as though my main disconnect always came just from my peers, like my fellow students. If I could think of something, and like, these are kind of like things that I spoke about over the summer with people that were like on USG and like, other multicultural clubs and stuff like that, attempting to institute some sort of bias modules or something like that into like the orientation, or maybe like just talking about like diversity or something in depth. I don't ever remember any fruitful conversations or like progressive conversations about any of those topics going on in my freshman year for the most part, outside of Asili and like outside of like clubs that kind of discuss those kind of things. I feel like having a discussion or like a conversation, I feel like having a discussion about that like on a school-wide, like, university-wide kind of platform would be, I guess you could say, like beneficial for like the student body and such.
Who do you think can facilitate those conversations? Because those conversations are so hard to have about race and racism, and it's really hard to talk with white people who aren't good at talking about race. And one of the things that I've spoken a lot with our Chief Diversity Officer, Rafael Zapata, is kind of how do we make sure that it's not the same student leaders all the time who are being asked to kind of perform their pain and explain how much things stink, right? Because that's a lot of pressure on you as a student when your job really should be to learn, not to be teaching us, right? So how can the faculty, who should be training the faculty, and how do we make sure if we put this in place that we are having the conversations led in a way that would be progressive, that would be helpful?
Quick shout out to Raphael. I actually work for him. We got a call like at like 3 o'clock. So, shout out Raphael.
Excellent.
To answer your question, I feel like maybe this isn't like the greatest solution, I guess, but maybe like inviting like faculty or like administrators to kind of speak about it is something that could kind of help, because I think people definitely take people who are like in roles of like power, like, when it has like that relationship of like a teacher and student as opposed to like student to student, they take those people a little bit more seriously. I've heard many people, this is just like one of many examples. Like there are like plenty of people at the university who definitely have like powerful voices. I know a lot of people have told me, like professors like Mark Chapman or like Professor Nason, Mark Nason, like those people have definitely like facilitated conversations and have changed minds and informed people and stuff. Just like not only through their like their classes, but like just their presence outside of the classes as well. I'm a Gabelli student. There's almost a 1% chance that I'll be ever taking a Chapman or a Nason class,
Right.
However, like, I know who they are. I've sat in a Chapman class and, he welcomed me, even though, I wasn't one of his students. He let me like sit in the back just like for a few minutes to kind of hear about the kind of things that, he discussed and talk about. I think this is like last year, maybe. It's like kind of like facilitating like those kind of experiences for students to kind of have the opportunity to sit around, hear what people have to say, learn, even kind of encouraging people to go listen to things outside of the university. There are a lot of voices that like aren't just at Fordham's campus, to get like authentic, genuine experiences with people of color. There's a whole entire community of people of color, especially in New York City, like I'm not going to say the most diverse because I don't know, but from what I've experienced, the most diverse city in the world. So I would say like kind of encouraging those kind of things would be important.
Can you talk a little bit about why you decided to put yourself forward and invest your time in taking on a leadership role with Asili?
I'd seen a lot of upperclassmen that I knew who were part of like the leadership of Asili. My leadership role, I guess you could say, in Asili started at the very end of my sophomore year when I had ran for the social media coordinator position of the e-board. At first I wasn't even going to run for the e-board, but, I walked into a club meeting one day. One of my friends was like, bro, like, you got to get on this e-board. You should just do this. We've seen all these people who are about to graduate do this for years. We need to continue this, and I was like, you're right. Like, I definitely should try to, like, do something. I kind of got complicit with being able to just sit back and be like, yo, this is, like, my friends. This is my space. I'm cool here. I don't want to do anything. I just want to chill with these people and then go home. At the end of the day, I probably should be engaging on a wider basis, because who knows if there's other people who've experienced the same thing I experienced like the last 2 years. I joined Asili as a social media coordinator, like I said. The end of my sophomore year, I held that role from the end of my sophomore year throughout my junior year. And then at the end of my junior year, well, not the end, maybe like around February of my junior year, the e-board from last year had decided who were going to be like the president, vice president, secretary and such. So, they had passed on that role to me, the role of the president.
Can you talk a little bit about what the conversations in the e-board were like in terms of the demands that you guys released over the summer in the wake of the murder of George Floyd and the COVID epidemic, and kind of how you interacted with the Black at Fordham and Let's Talk About It Fordham Instagram accounts? Talk to me just a little bit about your thinking and how you were trying to create pressure on the university to make change.
Yeah, for sure. So I'll just talk about first like how that list of demands idea had came up, and then I'll talk about kind of like how we were able to like push that forward. Yeah, I'm not going to take credit for everything. Like at the end of the day, Alex, the secretary of the club, she had came forward to us and she was like, guys, like, yeah, we're posting all this informative stuff. Yeah, we're like doing our fundraisers, raising thousands of dollars and stuff like that. But she was like, we need to press issues. Like, we need to have like substantive change at the university in and of itself, right? So Alex had came forward and she said, like, I'm going to make a list of demands. You guys can contribute to it, and we're going to post that. And I was like, all right, that sounds good to me. So, we had a quick brainstorming session, me, her, and Miranda. We had came up with some of the demands. I mean, she came up with the majority, like the good majority of them. She's real tapped in. She works with like a lot of things on campus. I know like she's worked with like some USG stuff. She's on the committee of sexual misconduct. She's on the student advisory board. So like she's a political science major. Like, so she had used everything that she had learned in the past few years at Fordham University to kind of criticize and try to make Fordham University better. Definitely will give her a huge shout out because, she had the biggest contribution. to making that list of demands. Everybody else had like, we had contributions, but it was definitely like her for the most part. She held that one down. So when it came to kind of putting the list of demands out there, we had decided what's the tools that are going to be most utilized over this pandemic. Like, how do we create the most buzz? How do we create the most amount of attention? And after like the Black Lives Matter movement kind of have like ramped up a lot at the beginning of this summer, we had started getting a lot of followers. This past 6 months, we probably gained a little bit over 2,000 followers on our Instagram. And, that's a lot of like university students, I guess you could say, just wanted to kind of like be more tapped in, more informed and such on like the things that are happening on campus. So we had kind of just decided like, we're going to utilize social media as the tool that we use to get this out there. If you look at like the demographics that interact with Instagram, it's mostly 18 to 24 year olds. That's college age students. That was the platform that we used to get most of our information out there to our fellow students. But I'm not going to like pretend like we did it on our own, because we had so many people reaching out to us and kind of like supporting what we did. We had done like an email blast where we put the email link in our bio, and I think we got over 3,000 clicks on that. Over 3,000 emails were sent to like administration at the school.
Wow.
Alumni had reached out to us and were like, we can set this up that all people have to do is click and the email will be sent, like, and that's it if they want to send it. So, alumni had set that up for us. My point is that, we had a lot of support from all sides. So, and just like the viral nature of it, like everybody sharing it, everybody liking it, everybody reposting it, everybody was kind of talking about it or like bringing it forward as an issue. So that's how the list of demands kind of came about and was distributed, I guess you could say. I'm also going to shout out our new social media guy, though, Gerald De La Cruz, because I was kind of monitoring the social media when I first got on it, but all the Instagram posts that had the graphics for the list of demands, I would text him. I would be like, hey, like, we need something. He would get it back to me. I'd be like, perfect, Of course, like, we came up with the strategy, but like, who implemented the strategy and put it together? I just want to always emphasize that's always a team effort, because I never want to take too much credit for anything that goes on.
For our listeners who are not familiar, what are one or two demands that you could share with us so we can get a sense of the kinds of things that you guys were advocating for?
There's one demand on the list of demands that said to hire more Black and queer professors at Fordham University. But I feel like that demand on the list of demands was important just because I believe that representation is super vital to engaging with any student who's at the school. To see somebody who looks like yourself, or to see somebody who's like definitely from like a similar background as yourself, is definitely a way to get people more engaged. I know Professor Clarence Ball. He had a good impact on me, and we have a great relationship now. I work with him on like a lot of like different things, like mentoring program that Gabelli has. Grateful that I was able to make that relationship back then. So I would definitely say like seeing yourself in the people who are kind of like teaching you, leading you, the people who you're promising your whole entire foundational college knowledge on. Like, it's important that they can relate to you in different ways. Not necessarily everybody, because there's always experiences to be learned from people who don't look like you, who aren't from your own background. But I feel like that relation is important. Another one of the demands on the list of demands that come to my mind first and foremost, the one about severing like connections and ties to the NYPD, especially like during this time where like police brutality and all these different things were like a hot topic. The University of Minnesota, they had cut their ties with the MPD. So like just following like other institutions and like kind of like seeing like that, we were all like, hey, like this is something that should be involved and included. We had a lot of robust conversations with student affairs, like, Dean Rogers is definitely like somebody who has engaged with a lot of conversation with us. We've talked about things and like topics surrounding those things. So like there's definitely like conversations being had. There's like a lot of information, I guess you could say, being learned on both sides. Those are just two of the things that come to mind immediately for me.
So can you talk a little bit about what it feels like when you get in those conversations and people are kind of telling you to go a little slow, or this is going to be harder than you think?
I definitely say like just an emphasis on like poise is important. Just being ready for those conversations, because when you get into like those conversations with like administrators or like, people who are like people who kind of like proponents of change at the university, you got to come prepared. Like, they don't want any BS. They don't want anybody who's kind of just like wishing and, having like dreams and stuff like that. So coming to them with real concerns, real facts, real data, those are the kind of things that inform the conversations and make them easier to have. I had said the alumni had set up a survey for us that they had sent out, where we had like, I think maybe like 1,000 responses on that survey. But the survey was asking different questions, like, as a student at Fordham, have you ever felt racially profiled? Or as a person of color, have you felt, like, things like that. And, we had came to conversations with that information. Like, when this percentage of your students say that they felt discriminated against, there have been bias incidents, they've had negative experiences with this department, that department, this kind of this person, that person. Not like they had like specific names or anything like that. Obviously, anonymity is important to like, surveys and like unbiased reporting or whatever. But kind of having like that data, like that understanding, like whether it be like qualitative things or quantitative things, is important. So I definitely say like sitting in those rooms. If you're unprepared, it could be real intimidating. If you're prepared, it could still be intimidating. But at the end of the day, I feel like as students, administrators and faculty, like not that their lives are dedicated to us, but like they kind of like care for us. We're paying for this experience.
Were representatives of the university open to this process with you, or were they resistant? Or after some contextualizing and explaining, do you feel that you made some real progress in those conversations?
It's very circumstantial just because we have spoken to like a lot of different faculty and administrators. For me, I just feel like the first step is always having the conversations in and of themselves. The progress, maybe this is me being optimistic, but the progress will follow. Like, definitely people were receptive, maybe not always receptive. Maybe after like explanations and contextualizing, there's like definitely receptivity. We've had so many of those different conversations with like so many different faculty and like departments and stuff that's kind of like difficult to make like one monolithic experience of it,
Is it getting easier as these conversations accumulate?
I guess you could say the accessibility of the people and like the willingness to have the conversations is definitely the first step for me. Dean Roger had told me it's a yearly tradition for him to meet with the president of Asili. The conversation that we had yesterday over lunch, it was pretty good. Like I was grateful that he had reached out to me and like kind of let me know that he's going to always be like a resource for like our club and students, like making sure like bias incidents are reported, So like things like that, like everybody kind of like coming forward and making sure like that I know they're accessible. That doesn't necessarily mean that like, this is not a knock toward him, like just in general, like that doesn't necessarily mean that people are actually going to like make any difference. But me knowing that they're there and like I know who to go to and stuff like that now. Because before I didn't, like I was kind of like a fish out of water, like I said earlier. I just got emails and I was like, oh, it's time to talk to this person now, but now I know who to email instead.
So one of the things we've been talking about a lot in this podcast is how faculty have made the switch to this hybrid model or this online model. And I'm wondering if there are things that you've seen faculty that you want to tell your professors about how they're handling either the kind of challenges of the new modality of teaching or how that modality kind of interacts or intersects with issues of structural racism and structural inequalities.
I will say this, the classes are more difficult for me. I feel like sitting at a laptop all day is definitely not something that I am like attuned to. I've always been like a person who like kind of feeds off of like in-person interaction, like other people and such.
Totally.
But I don't think I've had like any terrible experiences with the online learning aside from just not liking online learning, But a lot of my professors, like they're trying their hardest. I haven't had any bad experiences so far, but maybe I just have like the good professors. Maybe some people have had bad experiences because
what do your peers think about beyond Arthur Avenue and Yankee Stadium? Do they venture out into the Bronx to do things?
Very rarely, I would say. And like I think that comes from like all races at Fordham University. I definitely would say that I've met a lot more Black students who like have been inclined to explore like the Bronx. I guess there's like a level of comfortability when it comes to like being around other people who look like them. But for sure, like I'd say like majority of people that I've met have not been outside of like the general vicinity or like like the other like big hubs of the Bronx. Except for like certain people though, like one of my friends, she had graduated last year. Her name was Maddie. One day, like, we went to go, like, eat somewhere, and she was like, oh, yeah, like, I've been here on the 9 bus. I was like, you've been on the 9 bus? I was like, that's cool, though, like, she was like, yeah, like, I've took time to kind of, like, learn about the community. I was like, hey, like, that's dope. Like, I can't say I've heard that many times before, Or, like, I had a friend, her name was Signe. She graduated last year as well. One day she had asked me like if I could go with her like to the supermarket. I was like, yeah, sure, I'll go to the supermarket. And I was like, we're going to Trader Joe's or something? And she was like, no, like I go to the supermarket on Bruckner Boulevard. And I was like, you know where Bruckner Boulevard is? Like, so it's definitely there's some people who definitely have taken the time. I wouldn't say majority. I'd say most people just get on the Metro North, probably not even the sub like the D train. They probably just get to the Metro North and straight to 42nd, Yeah, I don't think many people have taken the time to explore the Bronx and like, what it has to offer and stuff like that. Like I said, like Most of my friends have.
So that's a big, big campaign that Dr. Mark Nason is on, right? Is to make that part of orientation, to make that a class that all freshmen take, to really invite Fordham students to experience and taste and eat. He's really into food in the Bronx, but to know about Bronx history, to know about Bronx culture today, to eat in the Bronx, to go shopping in the Bronx. What do you think about that as a strategy? If the university were to kind of include that in orientation, is that something that you think would make a difference for people and for the Fordham community?
If Fordham University, like all like the wealth that's like kind of like accumulated at the school, like per capita, kind of was like spent in the Bronx, I would like definitely like help local businesses and stuff like that. It's like, why would somebody go to Trader Joe's when they could go to like the supermarket that's down the block? I feel like that kind of just like reinvestment into its own community, and you can get the same quality of food probably. I'm pretty sure. I've been going to Bronx supermarkets my whole life, and I think I'm a pretty healthy individual aside from asthma, but that I got nothing to do with the supermarkets. People like shopping here in the Bronx, like being like involved with the community, it would have like a positive effect. And I think that my thing is like orientation is like huge, so it might be kind of difficult, but I can say that if the school wanted to kind of have like a peer aspirant model to look at, they could look at Urban Plunge, because Urban Plunge does that. My freshman year, coming into college, I had done Urban Plunge, and I remember they had brought like every group had like a different place in the Bronx that they were going to. I had friends who did Urban Plunge, and they were like, "Yo, I have to make a list of like different places in the Bronx for everybody to go to." Some people will go to like Pelham, some people go to Orchard Beach, some people go to like Van Cortlandt Park, some people went to Crotona Park. I know my group that I was with, we went to 161 Yankee Stadium. After like being at Yankee Stadium, they were like, "Hey, like, what do we do now? Like, there's no Yankees game going on. The time we're watching the game, we just came here. Now what?" I was like, "Well, like the Bronx Terminal Market is down the block. If you guys want to go like walk over there and like check it out."
Deontay, a lot of the people listening to this podcast are faculty at Fordham and faculty elsewhere. I'd just be curious to know if there's a teacher in your life who really made a difference to you, who that person was, if you want to give them a shout out and say kind of what their impact has been.
My answer is definitely my second grade teacher, Miss Robinson. She always had like, faith and like, invested time into me like this, like despite my behavioral issues and stuff like that. And, she always made sure that, like, she cultivated my work ethic and to make sure, like, I actually was dedicated to trying, further my education. Like, she would always say, just like her little catchphrase, she would like, "All right, power is," and like, we have to be like, "Power is knowledge," and then she would like, "Knowledge is," and then we have to say power. And then she would like, "Okay, then, so you guys know that, we need to all get our educations. We need to go to college, because education is the thing that's going to free us," stuff like that, So I would hear that, and I'd be like, Miss Robinson, like those are the kind of things that I internalize, like going forward. Like those are the kind of lessons that I still keep in my mind to this day, and I haven't kind of let go of. I've definitely had great teachers like my whole life, a lot of great teachers, but I definitely would say that Miss Robinson had the biggest impact on me, or probably like she's tied with maybe one other person. But I'm gonna have to give it to her though, because she was dealing with me at 8 years old. Somebody else was dealing with me at 17. It's only positivity on this side. Miss Robinson always reinforced that. So, definitely.
That's beautiful. We couldn't end on a better note. Deontay, thank you so much for your time.
Twice Over Podcast is available on SoundCloud, Stitcher, and Spotify, with new episodes appearing twice each week. For host and guest bios and show notes, please visit our website, twiceoverpodcast.com. You can follow us on Twitter at twiceover1 or email us at twiceoverpodcast@gmail.com. Thanks so much for listening.